Hey there. Greetings from cloudy Carnes today. We are uh, supposed to get a bunch of thunderstorms coming through. So I was originally going to do this broadcast from our garden because I'm using that as an analogy, but I decided instead just to do it from the front porch in case it rains. I got a little cover over my head. So yeah, welcome to Soul Care Check-In. And today I wanted to talk through a couple of things. Oh my goodness, Petra, I love your guts. It always makes me so happy whenever see you. Please tell Tom and Emma and Molly I said hi. So today we're actually going to be talking through I've kind of noticed over the past little bit in my life that I was feeling something, but I didn't know what it was. And it seemed to hit about a couple weeks ago. And in that, it was very confusing, I think, because yeah, well, I couldn't put my finger on it, but it seemed like there was just something there. And so as I was thinking through, like our soul care check-in time, it's like, what has God been teaching me lately? How has God been teaching me lately? It's another really good question. How has God been teaching me lately? And am I willing to learn kind of what he's showing me? So the subtitle of this thing today was going to be the Impatient Gardener. I've learned that with our little Hope Garden thing, I'm very impatient. And I go and check it every day to see if anything's come up or gotten a little bit bigger. And it has, usually, a little bit. But there's some seeds that you plant, and nothing. Like me and lettuce aren't getting along right now. I don't know why, but planted a bunch of lettuce and it's not coming up. And so I think there's this feeling when stuff isn't going how you hoped it would or how you thought it would. And you're like, did I waste my time? Did I waste my money? Is this worth it? So the other day I was sitting there and I think I started to put my finger on what it was I've been feeling. And a lot of it is despair. And I think that's an interesting word to use. I usually don't say that, like I'm in despair. Or I'm acting desperately. Yet, when you look at despair, like I'm wanting things to change and I'm wanting them to change now. I'm either wanting a change in how things are functioning or my location. And I think it hit a couple weeks ago because I think the severity of things began to deepen. People started to see as we moved into May kind of how this is a bigger deal. Starting to realize how things may be affected in the fall, whether that be, sports teams going back to resuming and different things like that. And I started to notice, I think that was the feeling I was starting to feel was despair. I wanted things to go back to normal. I was holding on to hope for a long time, like, oh, this is just a passing thing. But then it's like, okay, this isn't going away as fast as I want it to be. And so there's despair there. And when I'm desperate, I try to force a lot of things. Whether that's I try to force people to act how I want them to act, force my kids to be quiet. When I'm desperate, I act desperately. I do things that I don't under normal circumstances, I probably wouldn't do. I reach for things I shouldn't. I compromise things I previously wouldn't. And so I think it's interesting. I think that's what I begin to feel. And so looking into and thinking through, like, okay, well, what is God trying to teach me in this? And looking at the garden again, is am I willing to wait on God? Um, and that question kept coming up, like, am I willing to wait? So I would go out and I planted this garden and I look at a seed and I'm like, am I willing to wait for this little sucker to come up? um, and the answer is no. I'm a pretty impatient gardener, but my frustration doesn't cause anything to change. That's a huge life lesson. Your frustration doesn't help. Most of the time, your frustration won't help. And so, am I content to wait on God? The answer is no. For a lot of times, no, I'm not willing to wait on God. If you start to look at our society, like, I'm not really conditioned to wait. Everything's at our fingertips. Everything happens quickly. We don't want to wait on anything. We expedite it all, 2-day shipping, like all these things. I don't think 2-day shipping exists anywhere now. But I'm not conditioned to wait. And what I do is I superimpose that onto my relationship with God. And I don't want to wait for God to work. I want God to work now. And if he doesn't work now, I start to doubt myself. I start to doubt him. All these things is, am I willing to wait? The answer is no. A lot of times I'm not willing to wait. I try to do it myself. That's why you see Peter, whenever Jesus is getting arrested in the garden, Peter chops the guy's ear off. I mean, he takes it upon himself. He tries to force it to make it happen, and take things in his own hands. And a lot of times I'm guilty of chopping people's ears off because I want things to happen. So I'm not willing to wait. Another thing that will happen during that time is this unhealthy distraction. And I use the word unhealthy distraction. I think sometimes we do need to distract ourselves from things. That can be a positive thing, to take your mind off of something, specifically so you're not obsessing about it, kind of thing. And so I think there's healthy distraction, and I think there's unhealthy distraction. And I think unhealthy distraction is a plague right now. In the midst of a pandemic, a lot of us are distracting ourselves in unhealthy ways. One of the concerns on the other side of this will be that a lot of unhealthy patterns of behavior, mental health issues, things like that, will have developed during this time. And so am I setting the stage for that? And one of the biggest reasons, though, y'all, that I don't like waiting is it reveals I'm human. Honestly, I don't like waiting on God because it makes me vulnerable. And I don't like that. I want to have it all together. I want to be the strong one. I want to do all these things. But when you wait, and when you have to wait, it's frustrating because you're face to face with your limitations. So I put these seeds in the ground, going back to the garden analogy. I put these seeds in the ground. I can't make those suckers come up. I just look at them and that's it. Like, I can water them. I can try to cultivate an environment in which they can grow. And I think that's what God wants us to do. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I can't make them grow. And it shows that I'm human in the process of that. So I don't like waiting because it reminds me that I'm human, and it reminds me that I'm vulnerable. And I think that's why I struggle a lot of times in that. And I wanted to say with that too, waiting does not mean idle. That's a difference. I think when we wait on God, we're preparing for God to work. I'm not trying to force things. I'm not trying to manipulate things, but I'm preparing for God to work. And so waiting on God, you're preparing for God to work. Idleness, you're being lazy, you're distracted, your heart's not there. It's not in the right spot. So idleness, your heart isn't in the right spot. Waiting for God, your heart is in the right spot, and you're trying to cultivate it. You realize you can't cause it, but you're trying to help create an environment in which God can work. I think too, during that time, I wrote down, am I waiting or am I wondering? So I was putting something together, and one of my daughters was helping me, and she was really wanting to help. And that's the way I am with God too. You see God working, you really want to help out. You really want to be a part of it. So I was like, okay, she can help me out. So it's like, here, hold my hammer while I do this thing. And then when I went to get my hammer back, she wandered off. Like, she had the hammer like way over there. And it's just like, hey, you wanted to help, but like, I can't. So the reality is God can work without us. He wants us to be part of it. But do we wander off? Like, do we get distracted and wander off instead of staying there and kind of waiting attentively? So sometimes I wander off in that. So a big thing too that kind of helps determine my attitude in the midst of all this is my perspective. And what is my focus? And I think the hard part now is that there are a lot of loud things in our society that are trying to garner our attention, whether that be economy, whether that be health, political opinions, all these tensions. There's a lot of things that are kind of trying to garner our focus. And I think we have got to keep God first in that. Easier said than done. But I think it requires taking time just to sit still and to, if my focus is God's sovereignty, then my perspective will be true. If my focus is the issues and not God's sovereignty, then that's when I drift, because I'm going to be more drawn to the issue rather than drawn to God. It's like when you learn to ride a bike, whatever you look at, the direction you're going to go. So you tell the kid not to ride into a bush, they look at the bush, they run into the bush. Same thing. Like if I'm looking at the wrong thing, that's where I'm going to head. And so I have to ask myself, like, what am I trusting in? And how am I setting myself up to walk with God in the midst of that? So I need to have daily reminders, because, you know, if my time focusing on God was disproportionate to my time on social media looking at other things, then, you know, it would be a miracle. But instead, I let so many other things distract me from the sovereignty of God. So all that to say, I need to know myself, know I wonder, know I have a hard time waiting, and I need to actively put reminders to help me wander back to God in a sense. So how am I putting these guidelines or factors into my day, these buffers in a sense that can help me kind of bounce back towards God instead of just heading off in some opposite direction? And so what am I focusing on? And then knowing, like, what do I need help with? Like, when are my vulnerable times? When am I, going back to when I started this thing, like, when are my times when I feel the most desperate? When are the times when I feel the most despair? And how do I proactively ask for help in those? So am I willing to do that? Remember, I don't like waiting because it means I'm vulnerable. So in the same time, like, I need to be willing to ask for help in those moments too. And so I think my questions I would leave you with today is, what are you trusting and focusing on? Because that's what you're going to drift towards. And then what do you need help with? And who can you ask to come in and help with that? So I can go in, by the grace of God, my garden still grows, no matter if I'm frustrated with it or not. And God still causes the increase. And that's the beautiful thing. So maybe next week we won't have thunderstorms, and I can actually show you the garden a little bit while we talk through these times and kind of check in. That has been a very kind of healing thing for me. Is it simple? And it reminds me of God's truth and his beauty and the simplicity of things. So Jesus always put the cookies on the bottom shelf for people. And so that's what we strive to do. So thank you so much for joining in with us. Love y'all. Praying for you. So fun to see y'all from all over here. And Matthew, that is crazy that your sermon is actually titled, "Are You Willing to Wait?" So love y'all. God bless.